Would you be able to sleep in a guest bedroom with these giant gaps between the doors and the floor and between the doors themselves? I don't think so. It's like a giant peephole, and it's just not a very pleasant experience for a guest. And even though these wood doors look original to this house, this is definitely not the level of craftsmanship I'd expect from a 1915 home. Just look at the alignment on these doors. And when you look closely, you can definitely see that this is a newer build because you've got a 2x4 and some rope trim up here that have been caulked but never primed, which is a pretty good signal that this is not original to this 110-year-old house. And hey, look, I respect the DIY hustle. I love the idea of adding French doors to a bedroom, but unfortunately, this was just not executed very well, especially if you value privacy, which most people do when they have a bedroom. So let's fix it today. To get started, I removed the French doors. One almost fell on me, classic. And that's when I found my first discovery in this wall, which is that someone had shimmed the hinges with coins. And again, you can tell this was not added far in the past because these are like 10-year-old coins. So if anyone was concerned about me removing these original French doors, I promise you, they're not original. They are pretty though, so I do plan to keep them and use them in a future project. Then I got started removing the strange rope trim. This is not found anywhere else in this house. This is a craftsman home, so it has very simple trim rather than this kind of ornate carved style of trim that you might find in a Victorian home. And if you watched my video where I demoed the giant arch in the living room and found what was hiding inside, you'll know that whoever did these renovations really loved using screws. And not just that, they loved using different kinds of screws so that I have to go find different bits for my driver and hope that I'm using the right one when I dig into these caulked over screw holes, which is not fun. And this is your reminder that you don't need screws to fasten trim securely because it will also make it a huge pain to remove later. Once I finally got this big hunk of 2x material out of the way, I could finally see what we're working with up top. And it's more Frankenstein trim. It kind of makes me think there may have been other French doors here before, the kind that latch at the top, but I'm not really sure. If you have any ideas, let me know in the comments. Then I got started removing the rest of the trim and getting a better look at what was inside this wall. Again, a ton of hidden screws that I had to find. I even used my foot for leverage because these screws were so far into this wood, but I finally got enough pieces off to really see what was hiding inside this doorway. And just take a look at the top. Do you see that little rectangular box of wood? That used to be the solid wood wall that they cut into to expand this doorway. This was originally a single doorway that they had expanded to add double doors. And what's also cool is that on the other side, they left some remnants of the old wallpaper. It's very faded now from sun exposure, but when I zoom in, you can see that it has this really pretty floral pattern. If you can find a better version of this wallpaper, please let me know. I'd be very curious. So if you look at how this wall was framed before, from the right side, it was more closed up. But since then, this bathroom has been installed with this door. And if I were to redo that framing, the door would hit the bathroom door when it opened because I want to keep this side of the wall completely clear so that my parents can fit a full dresser. So the plan is to expand the framing from the left side instead so that when the door swings open to the left, it doesn't hit that bathroom door. A little tricky to visualize right now, but it'll make sense once you see it come together. And then just like in the arch project, you can see once you zoom in that this oak flooring on top is not the original floors. There is definitely antique heart pine below that's been covered up, which is a bummer because antique heart pine is so pretty and you really can't find it anymore except when it's been reclaimed from old buildings, so it's super expensive. Now, before I closed up this opening, I needed to know how much to close it up to, so I had to go look for a new door. And the reason I couldn't use the old French doors is because they are much thinner and smaller than you would need for a single door opening. So I went to one of my favorite places, the salvage store. The only thing I don't love about the salvage store is thinking about all the houses that these have been ripped out of. Just all of that character and history gone, maybe the houses even torn down themselves. But I do love that the pieces were saved and can be used by people like me who really love and appreciate old things. And look how many beautiful, beautiful doors there are. But I was on a mission for doors that perfectly matched the style of the other doors in the house and the same approximate dimensions. So after walking around a bit and ogling all the beautiful doors, I finally found one that was the right style and size. At first I thought it was completely wood and I was so excited, but one side is painted, so we're gonna have to strip it. I'm pretty sure that this side was just coated in shellac, which is a tinted coating that actually sits on the surface of the wood. So you can see here that when I apply the citrus strip and then I put on this plastic sheet for it to sit, the sheet already starts to remove some of that shellac. I was able to strip this thing clean in probably 10-15 minutes, which is unheard of when you are stripping a door. Once I got all that gummy shellac off, I cleaned it up with some towels and some dish soap that I scrubbed around, and then it was time to flip it to the problem side, the lead paint, which I got all over my clothes. And no, it still hasn't come out. out. Lots more citrus strip on this side. I tried to get a really thick layer on there, covered it with some more plastic, and let it sit a day or two before I started scraping. I could pretty much tell as soon as I lifted this plastic that it was not quite ready to be scraped yet. Citrus strip is not the strongest paint stripper, so I just scraped off what I could with this coating, added a bunch more citrus strip, brushed that around, covered it back up with the plastic, and then came back a couple days later to give it its final scrape. And I don't actually need to get every single speck of paint off of this because I'm using gel stain, which sits on the surface of the wood rather than penetrating it, but I do want to get this door as smooth as possible. So I scraped off all the paint gunk and then brought out some dish soap again, and then used a scrubber attachment on my drill to get in all the nooks and crannies. And if you haven't gotten scrubber attachments for your drill yet, I highly recommend it. It's basically power cleaning tools. This is what the door looked like afterward. It was giving whitewashed barn door, which I know some people would love the look of, but we weren't stopping here because the rest of the doors in this house have a very dark stain, just like those old French doors. So that's what we're trying to match. But before I got to staining, I needed to cut it down to size. The top of this door was actually a little wonky, which happens a lot in old homes where the foundation shifts, the doors won't close anymore, and people will shave off the tops or bottoms of a door to try to get it to fit in the opening. So I started by squaring off the top, and then I made a much bigger cut along the bottom because while this door was the best fit I could find at the salvage store, it was about 2 inches too tall. But also, look how cool this is. Once I cut open the door, you can see how it was originally constructed. It's a bunch of different wood pieces cobbled together to create this beautiful wood door. No screws, no nails, all just extremely precise craftsmanship. And once I got everything squared off, it was finally time to stain. This is actually the same can of gel stain that I used on my first ever woodworking project, which was my dining room table, and it has still lasted this long. I've stained an entire dining table, other pieces of furniture, and it is still going strong. And as a reminder, I link everything in the description down below if you have any questions about what I'm using. I love this really rich color, but it doesn't stay quite that dark because as soon as I start rubbing off the excess with some wipes, you can see that warmer color of the wood start to peek through, which is definitely what I wanted. This stained so beautifully. And friendly reminder, if you're using any kind of oil-based product and lots of wipes, put them all in a plastic bag and add water to them so that they don't spontaneously combust, which happens and burns people's houses down. Then while the stain dried, I got started on reframing the doorway, and I'm basing all of the measurements off the measurements of the new door that I bought and cut down. My goal for this was to use as much scrap material as possible from the demo of the arch because there was so much framing in there. So I just took all the nails and screws out and it was ready to reuse. So first up, I just pinned this little spacer block in place at the top, and then I added some pocket holes to this long piece of wood that would serve as the side of my wall. But the thing is, these walls are so thick that they're actually much wider than a 2x4. So even when I got this screwed in, I had to add another 2x4 to the side of it to completely span the width of this wall. To try to make them feel like one piece of wood, I added some wood glue and also some pocket holes that connected them from the side. Once the top was attached, I removed that spacer block and just moved it right down to the bottom to make sure that doorway was square. I pushed the bottom of the blocks up against them and then screwed those pocket holes into the floor. Then I added more blocking down below because I needed something to nail the baseboard into. I also then realized that I needed something to screw the added drywall into on the right side and the top. So I cut some blocks, pinned them in place with my brad nailer first, and then came back with some screws to secure them. Then it was time to close this new framing up. I started by cutting a piece of drywall, and if you haven't done this before, you kind of score it with a utility knife first, bend it until it snaps along that line, and then cut the paper from the other side to free the piece of drywall. So I cut it lengthwise first and then cut that to size. Then I just attached it to the framing with some drywall screws, and it was a closed up wall, at least from one side. I could have just covered up the other side, but I did want to add a little bit of soundproofing in here because again, it's nice to have privacy when you're in a bedroom. So rather than just a hollow wall, I added in some insulation. And again, because this wall is extra thick, I added in 2 layers of insulation. Then I covered that with another piece of drywall, and this started to really look like a single doorway. Then I filled out this little cavity at the top so that I had something to nail my trim into and got to work adding the trim. I like to start with the top piece first so that the side pieces can support the sides of the top piece. I just said side a lot, but hopefully that made sense to you. And if you watched the arch video, you know what I'm doing here. I'm making space for the new plinth blocks I made out of stair treads, so I have to cut back a little bit of this original baseboard, which is very strong and sturdy and required about 20 minutes of cutting per side. Don't recommend. Once I got the plinth blocks in place, I could add the front trim on. Then it was time to salvage the hardware from the old French doors and reuse them for this door. For now, I really just wanted to salvage these door plates, the hinges, and the mortise latch. On the other side of the door, they had these kind of cheapo metal modern door plates, and those I definitely don't plan on keeping. Now, this was the moment of truth. If you know anything about old doors, you know know that this weird little latch lock mechanism has to fit into the door itself. It's called a mortise latch, and oh my gosh, it fit. I was so excited because I was very not excited about having to get my chisels out and trying to open this up or find a new latch. It fit perfectly on the side. The only issue is that the back set for the knob was just a little bit off. You can see how the knob can't really fit down in there. So I fixed that by using a small hole saw and just expanded these holes slightly closer to the edge of the door. And thankfully that worked perfectly. All this hardware had been spray painted to look like a polished nickel before, but it was very glittery and fake and cool toned for the warm wood of the doors. So instead I'm going for an antique brass look. I started with a base layer of black, used my favorite rub and buff on top, and sealed it with some spray enamel. Then I installed those new brass hinges, but there was one final piece to make sure that this door actually fit in this doorway. The hinges need to be mortised into the doorway as well. And if you're still confused about what mortising means, you're about to see. Basically, I have to carve out a hinge-shaped hole in this wood for that hinge to nestle into. And that just allows the door to sit more closely against this door frame without a gap. And if you look at modern doorways too, they also have mortise hinges. Once I got those ready to go, it was time for the moment of truth, and I was very nervous. This was the moment when we figured out if all of the measurements I made and all of the math that I did was actually correct. And it was debatable. This is the first time I've ever framed out a door. Lots could go wrong. I got it on my jacks, I installed the hinges, and then time for the moment of truth, and it just barely didn't fit. The top was a little bit too tall, but because I already mortised these hinges and I did not want to change any of that framing up top, the best decision was just to take this door off its hinges and cut a little bit off the top of the door. Then I put the door back in place, crossed my fingers, and it finally fit. This may seem silly, but I don't care. I was so relieved. This was a lot of guesswork, a lot of me just making up stuff on the fly, and you know what? It worked. Believe in yourself, folks. I wanted to wait to seal the door until it was on because I just knew it was going to get a little banged up in that install process, so I just used several coats of a rub-on poly, and then I needed to install the doorstop trim. If you look at a doorway, this is the trim that goes right in front of the door to stop it from swinging too far in. It also is what helps to provide even more privacy by closing up all the edges around the door. Now, I'm using a lot of scrap wood here, so there was some cobbling, but I got everything filled, all of those seams bondoed, sanded everything, caulked all the edges, and then primed all of the bare wood. Finally, it was time to add all that beautiful antique brass hardware, and you just see how that brass looks so much better against that warm wood door. To be fair, I'm biased. I love brass, but I think it's true. Okay, let's take a little trip back through memory lane. Here is where we started, after demo, after reframing, and here it is with the new door. And she is a beauty. She matches the rest of the doors in this house perfectly and provides a ton of privacy for guests. So much better than all those weird gaps and cracks before. And I really love how it looks with the updated hardware. And I do, of course, plan to patch all of this drywall, but I'm gonna wait to do that until I reach the whole living room project because I plan to skim coat all these textured walls anyway. And finally, here's a little look at the doors on the inside and how they work. See how I closed up the framing in order for this door to be able to swing in and not hit that bathroom door. And now this becomes the little door wall, and the right side of the wall is completely free and clear for them to put in a dresser. And yes, I know these doors are a little more sisters than twins. One just has a little bit more of a supermodel build, but that's okay, and I think they still look beautiful together. And now that this guest bedroom has privacy, it's time to give it a full makeover. No surface of this room will go untouched. The walls, the floors, the ceiling, it's all going to change, and I'm so excited to share it with you.